Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we return to talking about the failing liberal-run mainstream media, in the United States at least. Most notably, we're focusing on their horrible takes currently going around, mostly related to the ongoing presidential election process. Yes, with President Donald J. Trump in a very good position to win re-election this year, well, all the lefties and centrists are scrambling to find some way to still find a hope they could squeeze Trump out of there. Unfortunately for them, though, none of the Democratic candidates seem to have a chance, as the field is becoming increasingly smaller and also coincidentally much older, whiter, and more male, all of which are demographics the Democrats have been demonizing for generations. Pretty ironic then for their nominees to all end up that way. And also we're going to see even more irony on the leftist side as we go into this news story now. What we're leading up to starts with another incongruent aspect of their side of things lately, and it involves the late coming overspending, showboating presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg. This billionaire media mogul not only barely adheres to Democratic principles, even running politically as a Republican previously in his past, but also many can't help but notice Michael Bloomberg is sort of like a Donald Trump of the left side. He's a rich and successful businessman who turned to politics later in life too. And also, both are known to be sort of centrist, bouncing back and forth between the left and right over time. Now, the main difference is, of course, and the problem for Michael Bloomberg is, he's coming into this during the middle of the Trump era. Trump was the first to do this, and he obviously started swinging more to the right side. But now, after 4 years of Trump in office, and 4 years of Democrats bashing and slamming and attacking Trump and his family for being rich, new to politics people for years, well, now Bloomberg seems to be guilty of many of the same things. So him coming into the Democratic as this sort of late long shot, well, he really had the world working against him. Fortunately, Michael Bloomberg also has billions of dollars working for him, so he could easily finance this last-ditch effort, overspending and flooding the market with his ads and promotions and sponsored speakers, all praising Bloomberg's name. And although Bloomberg eventually dropped out of the race, this story happened around that time, and I think it's still relevant this week. So let's get to the point, because this Michael Bloomberg liberal-run mainstream media setup is about to pay off big time. You see, what happened next was pretty priceless. After last week's Super Tuesday elections took place, a number of Democratic candidates began to drop out, including Michael Bloomberg himself. This led to TV hosts and political pundits discussing things thoroughly, inevitably going over how and why Bloomberg failed. Now, this is what led to a now infamous clip and exchange and series of events that reveal both MSNBC and New York Times representatives and how they can't even do basic math. And we'll get to that juicy video clip soon too, but first, let's turn to an article from Fox that has more details. It's called "Brian Williams, New York Times editor, ridiculed for getting Bloomberg math breakdown very, very wrong." This should be good. Let's go ahead and check it out. If someone had simply stopped and double-checked some math, they might have saved MSNBC's Brian Williams and New York Times editorial board member Mara Gray some embarrassment and an apology Thursday night. Instead, both Williams and Gay marveled on air in reaction to a Twitter user's post about Michael Bloomberg's campaign spending. Trouble is, the post had gotten the math all wrong, yet neither Williams nor Gay seemed to notice. So, we've got an editorial board member of the New York Times, you know, the long-running, most decorated newspaper of record in this country, at least it used to be. And one of their leaders is now, along with Brian Williams at MSNBC, a major cable news outlet, well, they can't even get simple second-grade level math right while on the air. And keep in mind, these are the same mainstream media elitists who mock and laugh at us normal average people day after day, calling us uneducated rubes who don't like to do no reading. At least that's how their cohorts at CNN, including Don Lemon, well, that's how they referred to us a few weeks back while laughing and making jokes. And also, these jokers at MSNBC, they're no different, and they would be laughing along the way too, even though, just like with Don Lemon, Brian Williams ain't too bright either, because now these high and mighty overeducated assholes, they're really making fools of themselves this time. These are college-educated media types who sneer at what they call redneck, trailer trash, deplorable, unwashed mass types like us. And what an illustration we've got here of the utter vacuousness of everyone at NBC and the New York Times, and everyone connected to this comedy we're about to see in video form. So with all that said, and without further ado, let's check out the clip for ourselves and see how this went down in real time on the air.
But you see it as a possibility if he wants to spend $1 billion.
Okay, well, first of all, can I get a warning about these crazy eyes before we get started? Jeez, I need to be prepared before I see a deranged look like this. Haven't seen a set of eyes that crazy since AOC flopped onto the scene last year. Yikes.
If he wants to spend $1 billion beating this guy, he could do it.
Absolutely. Somebody tweeted recently that actually with the money he spent, he could have given every American $1 million.
I've got it. Let's put it up on the screen. When I read it tonight on social media, it kind of all became clear.
Yeah, it became clear that you guys are a joke and you can't even do simple math. I'll give them some points because when people phrase this in the wrong way, it is tempting to want to believe this claim is true. At first glance, I could see this happening, and it would make a hell of a point if it was true too, but in fact, it's obviously not. And all these kinds of tempting falsehoods really prove is the people believing them don't think twice before falling for them because they're not that bright, and also they're just willing to and want to believe it. And there must be a lot of not so bright individuals in this news studio right now too, because it wasn't just the host and guest who fell for this BS. There had to be producers, cameramen, and a graphics guy, and fact checkers and everything. A large number of mainstream media news employees had to okay this before it got on the air, and they fell for this nonsense without thinking twice about the math. In fact, I would even go so far as to call this upcoming tweet and its idea, well, it's sort of a stupid trap, like how you put out a mouse trap with cheese on it, but for the stupid trap, you put out bad math takes and see if anyone in a position of power will bite. And well, today we've got two very big legitimate representatives from two major mainstream media news outlets, and they're both falling for this ruse hook, line, and sinker. Just goes to show how not smart they are, and also how they really don't care about money and how much things are worth. Makes sense too, since liberals just want to throw other people's money at everything, and since they didn't have to earn the money, they don't care about it or how much it's worth.
Bloomberg spent $500 million on ads. U.S. population 327 million. Don't tell us if you're ahead of us on the math. He could have given each American $1 million and have had lunch money left over. It's an incredible way of putting it.
It's an incredible way of putting it.
It's an incredible way of putting it? Well, sure, it can be incredible if you want to be dead wrong about everything, that is. I mean, just look at this original tweet again and follow along with me. Bloomberg spent $500 million on ads. Not a bad chunk of change, but it's also clearly not enough to give 327 million Americans $1 million each. With that kind of money, you could give 500 people $1 million each, and that would be no small feat either. But giving 327 million people $1 million each, well, that would require you to spend 327 million millions. Or rather, and to put it more accurately, that would cost Bloomberg $327 trillion. And while this guy is rather rich, but he's not $327 trillion rich. No one is that rich, really, I don't think. In fact, actually, there's no single person who even comes close to having just $1 trillion. Most of the world's richest people only have around 100 billion, and that's still a hell of a lot of money, of course, but we also need to stay grounded and put this whole thing into perspective and know how much 1 + 2 is, because it equals 3, not 4. And all this math doesn't really seem that hard or complicated to me either. Really, I just think these dum-dums on this TV show, they simply aren't as smart or clever as they think they are. And worst of all, they're surrounded by a bunch of low IQ yes men too, who just go along with everything and never want to challenge them at all.
It's an incredible way of putting it. It's true. It's disturbing. It does suggest, you know, what we're talking about here, which is there's too much money in politics. And it makes it difficult because what we want in...
Well, perhaps you're still right. Maybe there is too much money in politics, but there's certainly not as much money in it as you were thinking and suggesting before. And this is an important point to dwell on a bit more, because these two on the news here, they're not only perceiving the world in this false, ill-informed way, but they're also leading news-gathering companies who are trying to push this false, flawed worldview onto the rest of us. It's like the blind leading the blind, almost, or more accurately, it's a bunch of biased liberals who are so disconnected from the real world, they don't even know the difference between 300 million and 300 trillion. And if they can't properly calculate and handle that information, who knows what else they're going to get wrong or misread or misrepresent. They could think other wildly out of proportion things like, say, there's 1 million representatives in our Congress, or they could think 10 billion people die over racism each year, or they could think that black people are in jail 100,000 times more than other Americans. None of this is true, of course, and I think we can all start to see how someone who can't compute this kind of math, well, that means you can't relate and discuss things in proper ways, in proper proportions. And well, that becomes highly problematic and questionable, especially when you're dealing with high-profile, propped-up reporters like the ones in this video. Next, let's turn back to the original article, because believe it or not, but this story still has a few more beats left in it. Turns out Mara and I got the same grades at math. I'm speaking of the tweet we both misinterpreted. He could give each American $1 $1. Again, I didn't have it in high school. I don't have it tonight. I stand corrected. Sorry about that. The tweet is wrong, Williams told viewers later in the show. Garbage in, garbage out. One Twitter user who took notice of the bad math was writer Michael Salfino of New Jersey. What's wrong with these people, Salfino wrote. This would be right if there were 327 people in the US. And this reflects horribly on the New York Times too. Can someone stop and think for 2 seconds? Yeah, really? Is anyone there trying to think at all? And this does reflect poorly on everyone involved. The New York Times, and especially Brian Williams and MSNBC, they should all be very embarrassed. And I wouldn't be opposed to someone apologizing or getting fired or suspended for this either. Not that I want anyone to lose their job specifically, but if I was running that newsroom, I certainly would want someone to pay for this gross oversight that's costing their people and their network loads of credibility. I mean, Brian Williams is supposed to be this big network anchor type guy, a so-called legend in news reporting, but it is also worth mentioning he has a troubled past too. Back in 2015, Brian was demoted after he got caught lying about his experience reporting during the Iraq War. He claimed that a military helicopter he was traveling in had been forced down after being hit by an RPG at that time, but soon after his story aired, Williams was criticized by Lance Reynolds, a flight engineer on board one of the 3 helicopters that had been attacked. Reynolds and other crew members said Williams had been aboard one of a separate group of helicopters from the helicopter that had been fired upon, which was flying about half an hour behind and was forced to make an emergency landing because of a sandstorm rather than an attack. Not a good look for Bry Guy here, to say the least. And I think it's important and worth mentioning, especially considering what just happened now. Really, this bad math story goes to show a few important things then. First of all, it shows Brian is naive and bold enough to jump onto a story in the moment, especially if it supports himself, his narrative, or his liberal politics. Back in the Iraq story, he happily pretended his chopper was the one that was almost shot down because it made him look braver and more heroic, and it supported his cause at the time. And now with this bad math story, Brian is willing to go along with this bad math about Bloomberg spending because it helps further his point that Mini Mike was overspending and campaign budgets are getting out of hand. Both instances display grave lacks of judgment, ignorance, and the willingness to believe in things more, especially if they further your point or cause. And really, that's not the kind of person you want to be here, especially if you're a reporter. Reporters, at least formerly, they used to be these smart people who think critically and question everything. They're the original skeptics, kind of like police detectives, but independent of law enforcement, of course. But they're still intense investigators who would eventually write their stories only after doing lots of due diligence, research, and double and triple checking everything. But that's the old way, and now the new way for reporters to act in current year is to lie and or believe in false assumptions blindly, so long as it goes along with your own preconceived notions. National Review editor Charles C.W. Cook wrote that the math is obviously spectacularly off, but it's also very telling. This right here is why so many left-leaning Americans think that the billionaires can pay for everything. It's why Elizabeth Warren was enthusiastically boosted by the media despite her ridiculous pretense that she could pay for a series of gargantuan initiatives without raising taxes on anyone but the extremely rich. Cook wrote, "It's why Democrat after Democrat promises not to raise middle-class taxes while promising programs that require the raising of middle-class taxes. How did this bad tweet make it onto TV to be endorsed? Why did Mara Gray agree with it? Why didn't Brian Williams notice? Because the people involved in this clip thought it was true. This is how they see the world." Well put, Charles. This is something I was trying to get at more earlier too. Since the Democrats clearly see the world this way, that means they can't actually see things as they really are. They have no grasp of these simple concepts like math, money, economics, taxes, and budgeting. Why else would these groups think they could get away with offering free everything? Well, it's because they know their possible voters are dumb enough to think those things are actually free, when really they're just redistributing the wealth. The left will end up taxing us far more, and still, we won't have close to half the money needed to pay for all their extravagant promises. And that's all because, like how today's story shows, the leftists have very low IQs, and they can't do math, and they don't understand proportions well at all, and they don't know how the world really works. To them, a million is the same as a billion, which is kind of like saying a penny is worth the same amount as $100 bill. Hell, you could probably even compare a penny to $1,000 to really illustrate how far off this thinking really is. What do you guys think? Are MSNBC and the New York Times ever going to live this down? How can Brian Williams show his face on television after all this? And do you think people who can't do basic math should be trying to tell us how to live and vote in the United States of America? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button to help support this channel, and we'll see y'all next time.